Please welcome to the stage Bruce Katz, founding director of Drexel University's Nowak Metro Finance Lab, with Mark Ethridge, principal at Ascent Housing and board member of Housing Impact Fund. They'll be in conversation with Dr. Andre Perry, author of Know Your Price, Valuing Black Lives and Property in America's Black Cities, and Sonja Trauss, founder of Yes in My Backyard Law.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Bruce Katz. I'm going to set the context for this. So a little bad news, good news, bad news. Bad news, housing crisis. This is metastasized in the United States. We used to think of the housing crisis as superstar cities, New York, Boston, New York, San Francisco, Seattle. This is spread all over the country. When you think about the housing crisis as very low-income renters, this has moved up the income scale everywhere, affecting not only renters, but homeowners, okay? So we have a crisis on our hands, and the federal government really hasn't done a damn thing since 08, 09. We could bring that back to the presidential election conversation before. Good news, when you have a vacuum in the United States, what happens? States and locals fill it. State governments are doing remarkable things. Sonja will talk about this. Local networks, governments for sure, but also corporate philanthropy, developer, investors, community-based organizations, really inventing new practices, products, policies. The key here, and this may change the name of this whole forum, it's not just ideas you can steal, ideas you can scale. So there's a National Housing Crisis Task Force we've organized out of Drexel University with Accelerator for America, bipartisan, Utah governor, mayors of Atlanta and Cleveland, Fifth Third Bank. What are those practices that are bubbling up that you can scale and spread all over the United States? We're going to talk about that. Last piece, bad news. What's about to happen with Trump and the realignment in Congress? God only knows, right? We are in volatility land, unpredictable land, uncertain land. Are they going to do anything intelligent on housing, or are they going to retrench and push even more back to states and locals to basically sort out? Okay, so that's the context for this. We don't know what's about to happen. All we do know is that states and localities have a pulse and have been filling the vacuum for some period of time. And now we need to act as adults and basically not just have a federal agenda, but a national agenda for basically dealing with this crisis. So we're going to start with Andre, and we're going to talk about a few things, both what our panelists' view of innovative practices and policies and products that are bubbling, and what they are and how much impact they can have, but then how do we move this all over the United States, whether the federal government, acts intelligently or begins to actually be hostile. Andre, let's start.
Well, thank you, Bruce, and hello, Philadelphia. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm Andre Perry, Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institution, and most people know me through my work on housing devaluation, where we found that homes in black neighborhoods are underpriced by 23%, about $48,000 per home. Cumulatively, there's about $156 billion in lost equity. And just quickly, I would just want to always put that in context. $156 billion would have financed more than 4 million black-owned businesses based upon the average amount black people use to start their firms, would have paid for more than 8 million four-year degrees based upon the average amount of four-year education, replaced the pipes in Flint, Michigan 3,000 times over, covered nearly all of Hurricane Katrina damage, double the annual economic burden of the opioid crisis. It's a big number. And I only put that context there to share the importance of correcting this housing crisis. When people, across many different studies, we've seen always in the top four in terms of social determinants of health, housing is always there. And so when you correct for housing, you are actually adding years to people's life. You are giving people the ability to pass on wealth, and you're just essentially stabilizing people in a very volatile market. So for me, I just want to say one of the things that you'll hear me talk about in this in terms of scaling. I really do believe we have to scale our special purpose credit programs. And I'll say why. We have thousands of people in every market that have done everything required that you would think for in terms of their credit score, their income, but they simply don't have the down payment to buy a home. And that's how discrimination really shows up, on the lack of down payment. So if we can change the underwriting criteria in a way to get products to people to meet, get products to meet people where they are, we can have a new generation of homeowners. And so for me, I'll end there. But I talk about discrimination a lot, but in that there are opportunities, because if we can increase home ownership and improve affordability, you're getting more revenue in people's pockets so that they can advance their neighborhoods and themselves.
This is great, because if it was just like a game show, it would already click down. Okay, change underwriting. Okay, we got a solution here. We'll figure out who does it. Fed, stays. Sonja, Yimby, oh my Lord. You guys are crushing it around the country. Talk about what you're doing and then also this scaling bit.
Yeah, and I mean, unfortunately, we're crushing it because, as you mentioned, the problem is huge. So I'm from Philadelphia, but I moved to the Bay Area in 2011, and I was teaching high school math, not making really a lot of money at all. And rents were rising because, the Bay Area is one of these economic superstar cities in the U.S., and people were moving there for jobs. In a way, that's why I moved there. Philadelphia is actually doing a pretty good job, and San Francisco was doing a bad job of building new housing as more people, moved in. And I can't tell you this is so essential. I mean, it's kind of obvious, but if you have a population increase, whether it's because you have great jobs or just because people are having children, and usually it's a combination of both, if you don't build enough housing, then people are just going to be displaced, and it's going to be low-income people and renters. Obviously, homeownership gives you a tighter hold, but frankly, homeownership can't totally protect you. There are people whose taxes rise. As more people move in, rents go up, property values go up, and that can make your taxes go up. And there are people who are forced out by that, So if you want to maintain, the communities that you already have here in Philadelphia, the building that's already been happening is essential, and you have to do more. And we see the results. My mom just texted me an article, I think, from November 11th in the Inquirer that said that vacancy rates is 8%, which is actually great news, right? Don't let local media be like, high vacancy rates, low rents, it's a problem. A lot of times, media will report bad news either end, right? They'll say, rents are rising, bad news, that is bad news. But then, when developers respond, for-profit, nonprofit, whatever it is, when developers respond to high rents and then they build a lot of stuff, and then inevitably, everything comes on at the same time, the news will report, bad news, rents crashing, vacancy rates up. Okay, only one of those is bad news. It's actually good news for the, rents to soften and for renters to have more market power. So that's been our pitch, and I really actually want to organize you guys right here. If you're here, you're also part of your neighborhood association. Ask yourself, when apartments are being proposed in your neighborhood, are you saying yes? I want to hear that from a few more people.
That wasn't a resounding yes.
Go ahead and lie about it here so that later you will fulfill that promise. It's not a lie yet. You can say yes now and then later actually do it. It's super important. I think that a lot of people here are very concerned about, demonizing immigrants. I'm Jewish. I feel like demonizing outsiders, in a second, it's gonna come home to roost. And it's, bad anyway. And if you wanna help that problem, right, we have to be fighting for abundance. Batya earlier, I think, was making really good points. But one of the things that she was saying is that, people have perceived problems, whether it's, my wages aren't high enough or rents are going up. And those are their real problems. And what the current Republican Party is doing is they're telling people a solution. You know, they're saying, oh, rents are rising because immigrants are moving in and they're competing with you for housing. That's what happened in Springfield. At the end of the day, Springfield, Ohio, that was a housing problem. Or they're saying, you know, there's too many immigrants and they're competing with you for wages are going down. That's a scarcity mindset, and we don't have to accept it, right? We can say no. No, we can make more. You can make more housing so that people aren't competing with each other, whether it's immigrants from over, you know, a border or just immigrants from, you know, Allentown. And you can all this stuff makes jobs. 20% of the construction industry apparently is immigrants, which surprised me. Actually, I thought it would have been higher. So if somebody else has a different number, that might be true. But apparently it's 20%. So, you know, on either end, adding more housing is fighting back against this scarcity narrative. And I really want to emphasize, like, literally, it is exactly you who are the people who can either make this happen or by doing nothing, keep it from happening.
I'm about to go on ChatGPT to figure this out. But if someone wants to do that in the audience, before we go to Mark, you know, the one thing about the work you and your colleagues have been doing around the country, which is brilliant, is you've changed the language from NIMBY to YIMBY. So if you want to take full credit for that, go for it. But like that is able to sort of simplify and maybe just talk through that shift that went on in the movement, so to speak.
Well, definitely when we started on the scene, there was a sense, and I just remember reading an article in Shelter Force, actually. I don't know if people here read that. And it was...
But you didn't say yes.
Definitely read it. But it was such a epitomized, it was so motivating. It was something like in 2017 or something, you know, it's a few years ago. It epitomized why I was doing what I was doing. And this person of, you know, a progressive in Shelter Force was like, gosh, I don't know what to do. Because on the one hand, yes, obviously we need more housing. But on the other hand, when you build, you know, new housing in low-income neighborhoods, it causes gentrification. And so it just seems like there's no solution. I was like, buddy, where do you live, right? He was clearly a white-collar professional. I was like, your neighborhood is the solution, right? Build housing where there is no gentrification because everybody's already rich. And these are typically low-density places that can really accommodate it. It's a little different in Philadelphia because Philadelphia is one of the greatest places on earth, but the most typical lot size and shape in the United States is 50 by 100, 5,000 square feet. If everybody think about your row house. You know how many row houses you can easily fit on 500 square feet? It's 4. Perfectly fine. You have space for parking and a little yard, and it's one stupid little house, right? So turning those one houses on, you know, these 5,000 square foot lots into 4 houses, this is abundance. That would actually make a huge difference. It's still relatively cheap housing. I don't remember what your question was.
It doesn't matter.
I went off. I'm sorry.
NIMBY to YIMBY.
Right. So we that's the way we changed the conversation, right? Is that we were exploding this idea of like we only have 2 choices.
I had a teacher like you in my public high school, by the way. But Mark, Charlotte. A lot of focus on Charlotte in Philadelphia for a whole bunch of reasons, mostly around purposeful and intentional networks, public leaders, corporate leaders, financial institutions, the banking capital, nonprofits, really trying to address certain challenges like housing. Okay, what are you doing and how did you do it and is it replicable?
I'm like the least captivating person on the stage right now, so I apologize for that. You know, I mean, we need more supply of housing in this country. We still fundamentally underbuild housing compared to the times before the 2008 financial crisis. And, you know, like, I look at Charlotte, like, you know, it's funny, like, people see cranes everywhere, there's apartments, they see these huge numbers. We build 14,000 multifamily units a year. We built more multifamily units per capita in 1972 than we do now. So single family has gone down a lot. Multifamily seems like it's going bananas. It's not in historical terms. And it's creating these huge problems. Now, the problem that we focus on is the fact that, you know, the vast majority of affordable housing or housing affordable to low and moderate income households in this country is privately owned, market rate, unrestricted, right? And that has been our breadbasket to house everybody who needs lower housing costs forever, and it has no protections. And the best horse that the federal government has created for affordable housing in the last 40 years is the low-income housing tax credit. Really doesn't work well on that stuff. You know, you really can't take that and then go buy that housing when it comes available for sale. And so what do? You know, it wasn't that big of a problem when we didn't have this huge supply and demand imbalance. But in this economic cycle, the last 15 years, you've seen these things called NOAA preservation initiatives, NOAA, naturally occurring affordable housing. How do we take the stuff that's affordable because it's a little bit older, maybe a little bit run down, maybe in a neighborhood that's up and coming but not quite there yet or has disinvestment over the years, and how do we protect it? Because for as much, you know, in Charlotte we were building like 312 affordable housing units a year, losing about 3,000 units of naturally occurring affordable housing a year. And so even if we can get our tax credits to do a little bit more, we can get some good homeownership programs, we can tweak up some rental subsidies a little bit, I mean, you got to stop the bleeding first. And so we looked at a private sector solution, you know, and I think we have a capital markets problem in this country where, like, you have stocks, you know, you're divvying up some wealth, right? You got to go put it out on the market. You got stocks, bonds, and alternatives. Real estate's and alternatives. Alternatives, it's risky. So this risk-reward spectrum has to be different. And so, you know, the private equity that goes into real estate investing, including housing, wants more return than other products like bonds. And so we're taking this thing and we're putting this really high cost of capital on housing that's, you know, a fundamental human right, you know? And there's this mismatch. There's this huge mismatch there. And so I look at all of the capital, whether it's philanthropic capital, whether it's straight up private equity, I say, how do we change the risk paradigm for this when we realize that we have, you know, however many hundreds of millions of Americans that need housing. We don't have enough of it. And so can we change the fact that it is not risky to be in ownership of this? It is not risky to be renting these housing units to folks because we have this undercurrent of demand that is unsatisfied for a long time. If you bring that cost of capital down, which is we've done, we've raised $125 million of private sector financing. We get a lot of it from our friends at the banks who, thanks to the Community Reinvestment Act of 1986, you know, they have mandates that they need to fulfill on putting those dollars in to serve low and moderate income households. And then we also look at the philanthropic world and we look at things like foundations and donor advised funds, and we say, we don't want to go and compete with all our favorite nonprofits on that 5% of that money that goes out a year to grants. What I want to look at is the 95% of that money that is sitting in stocks, bonds, ETFs, and mutual funds, and said, what return are you getting there? Can I match you something close to that and going out and buying these multifamily communities and locking them down with deed restrictions? And can we move some of your dollars into mission that are supposed to be in mission now instead of just being invested in the market? I think there's kind of a huge sea change that we could see. There's $230 billion in donor advised funds in this country. You know, the amount of capital held at foundations and endowments, it would be a more impressive number. And we have to look at things like our pension funds. Like, where are our government pension funds? What are they investing in? You know what they invest in sometimes? Invest in real estate companies that like to buy apartments and jack up the rents and displace people. So, like, what psychology is that? You know, there's this really funny thing on Instagram sometimes where it's like, there's a teacher who needs affordable housing, and she's like, well, thank goodness my, you know, retirement accounts are doing well. And then they look at the pension fund managers like, let's give it out into this alternative investment class because we can get a higher yield and we can really grow the base of these pensions. And then that thing is buying the apartment complex that teacher is trying to afford and jacking up the rents, right? It's like, how counterintuitive is this? And so we really need to re-index the way we think about this capital. We really need to harness the capital markets, trillions of dollars out there, and find ways to do it. Affordable housing is one of the few things in charitable work and altruism we actually get to invest in a thing that can pay you back some dividends. You know, you don't get to do that with a lot of things in human services. You don't get to do that in a lot of other things in the space of overall philanthropy. And so, like, why not embrace that and unlock a really large part of the capital in this country to really solve this problem?
Okay, so to summarize, you know, what we've just heard is the math doesn't work, right? The math of a place like Charlotte, building 300 units a year, losing 3,000, oops, you got a problem, right? The current system, highly fossilized. I mean, the low-income housing tax credit, which will be completely devalued by tax reform, has existed since 1986. And it's financialized, as you just described, brilliantly, right? I mean, we should be able to figure this out. Okay, quick question. tomorrow Trump nominates Bozo the Clown. Nope, he already did that for Attorney General. Okay, someone else nominates someone for HUD Secretary. You've got 10 minutes, because the feds do matter, right? And Andre just started with that. What is the one thing, because Trump, a builder in a prior life, one would think you could maybe marshal the energies of public, private, and civic to actually go at this. So what's the one thing you say, and you could expand on access to capital and credit as you were talking about before?
Well, there's also just a coordination issue.
Yeah.
I mean, I would just ask for an interagency task force to bring the various entities together. Most people in this room probably, if you saw a chart of who's quote unquote in charge of housing,
right,
it's like dozens of different agencies. And so we do need someone to just have an effort to bring these things together. And by the way, this happens on occasion. Even my work, the Interagency Task Force, the Property Appraisal Valuation Equity Task Force, was a group of disparate agencies that kind of work closely together, but they never come to the same room. They did come to the same room. It can happen, but then you also have to add on state and local entities as well. And then the other thing I'll say too, that this is also a workforce issue. That since the housing crisis, we have seen a significant decline in builders. And herein lies the opportunity to get people back to work. People without college degrees can train and learn and become part of this new emerging industry that should take hold. But of course, as you stated, that one, we're going to have to remove some of the constraints around these single-family zoning ordinances without a given. But if we do that and we provide the resources to build, we can also create a labor force, a much more diverse labor force, so that they can one day buy the homes that they're building, because let's not forget that no home will ever be affordable if incomes don't come up, if people don't have quality jobs. So we need to figure out a way to corral this industry, this emerging industry that's going to happen, but put people to work at the same time.
So changing the way the federal government actually organizes itself, it makes so much sense, because if you call an agency Housing and Urban Development, I guarantee you in Washington, they're not in charge, right? I mean, it's the Treasury that's in charge, or the banking institutions that are charged. So we have to basically pull this together. Sonja, you got 10 minutes, and HUD Secretary or the President-elect.
Okay, but I don't have 10 minutes here.
Okay, you got 2 minutes.
Make Section 8 an entitlement, including making sure people can use Section 8 to pay a mortgage. I think they already can in some, I'm not sure. In some states, okay, yes, we want that. And we also want, do something so that cities create pre-approved plans. Like, this is something, you know, if you can go and, do a project application and pick from existing pre-approved plans. Some cities do this, especially for ADUs, something we really, really need to expand to really facilitate the entitlement process. That's it, yeah.
Well, in some ways, you know, you should testify before Elon Musk's Government Efficiency Commission. I mean, because...
Oh, that's right.
There you go.
Here's the government efficiency part. A lot of landlords don't take Section 8, not because, or maybe not only because they're classist and racist, but frankly, they just don't want to deal with the housing authority. It's so much bullshit. And the standards to get a normal occupancy permit to just rent to anyone in the public are lower than to rent to somebody with, so this is ridiculous. We need an audit to clear out those regulations and get rid of that red tape.
Brilliant. Mark, maybe you don't want to leave Charlotte, by the way.
Well, you know, we're in the, like I said, we're in the Wild West phase with this preservation stuff. And not only is it just the naturally occurring affordable housing, we're now in this era now where we have the first LIHTC deals expiring, 30 years, right? And so now we have a huge sea. You know, I was talking to someone on the phone in Seattle last week, and they quoted to me how many, the volume of units that we have expiring out of LIHTC soon. So we have a lot of protections, a lot of preservation that's going to be needed. We have thought, you know, I've seen these scattershot, it's really usually comes from private sector leadership and sometimes municipal government leadership. We've never seen it at the state level. We certainly never seen it at the federal level, and we don't even have a national conversation about this. I think it's emerging at the moment. And so, cheap capital rules the world, and we need to get some standard definitions here, and we need to look at, is there a role for the government to play in that? I think there's so much untapped potential in the capital markets and the private sector that you could spend all your time on that, and I think we'd have wild success. However, if you look at something like opportunity zones and what that did, and you extrapolate something like that to look at this preservation and getting this cost of capital down and really unleashing some things, I think you could have some success, so there probably is a role to play.
Yeah, and so in some respects, maybe you shouldn't meet with the new HUD secretary. I mean, Tim Scott, who is the co-author of Opportunity Zones, senator from South Carolina, is now the chair of the Senate Banking Committee, is on the Finance Committee, is actively and openly saying, I want a housing bill. Okay? So maybe we start there. Larry, we're going to questions.
Yeah, we'll take you guys. Such a great panel, such an important issue. Who has something to say to these brilliant people? All right, let's start right here. And I'm going to try, then I'm going to try in the interest of geographic diversity to get up in there. And by the way, little known secret, Bruce Katz, the most passionate Beatles fan I've ever met.
You have no idea.
Say who you are.
Okay, hi. My name is Michelle Billups. I am actually a social worker. So, and I agree with, I'm sorry, I don't remember your name. You're Sonja, but this gentleman right here.
Andre,
Thank you. When you were saying how people don't have that move-in money, right? So as a social worker, one of the things that I see a lot, because most of my clients, they're on a limited income, right? So they don't have thousands of dollars to spend to move in. Most places charge like about $2,500 to move in for first and last month's rent, and so you can move in, and then the rent is like, I don't know, whatever, $700, right? But if you only get $900, right? So now you're talking about your rent is 30% more than your income. So how can you survive on that? Because most of my clients get SSI.
Well, and this is where innovation comes. And I know what I'm about to say for some might sound bringing back some predatory type practices, but because so many, particularly for black people, there's such a high percentage of renters. We almost have to have some kind of rent to own type of mechanism. Mm-hmm. There's no way around that. And again, we also need a different loan product, a different mortgage to meet people where they are. And this is the other thing, we didn't talk about it much, but we just need homes that cost less to build, like modular homes and other manufactured type of homes, because
the pre-approved plans kind of helps with that too.
Right, yeah. So for me, it's about managing all of that. The reality is, because a lot of people, I disagreed a little bit with one of the last presenters talking about race. It was not as much of a factor. It is you see it in the outcomes. People across many races are feeling pain. Why they are feeling pain is different. So for people who have been subjected to discrimination, there is a material loss of capital as a result that you have to deal with. So for me, it is about figuring out a way to create a rent-to-own mechanism, but also creating homes that are just cheaper to build.
Absolutely. Where's Larry? Oh, next. Yep.
Yeah, we're all the way up here.
Oh, wow.
This is like the nosebleed seat.
Yeah. Say who you are.
Gary Mills from Shoot Basketball's Not People. And my question is, we're talking about housing crisis, but we never talk about the toxic assets in the land for recreational programming. So what do you suggest, like getting the private sector involved with recreation, like gyms and recreations to fit the low-income families that service these neighborhoods that are being gentrified?
Very interesting. So new financing models, not just about housing, but around a lot of neighborhood amenities, right? Parks, recreation. Do we need to put that into the package?
I think I have a resemblance to the answer to that question. And it's something that I think about a lot is, we do wraparound services at our properties. And when we talk to our nonprofit service partners who are serving these families, we're providing this really amazing thing for them, which is we have your audience, your client base here at our properties. We know everything about them. If you can bring your services here, they don't have to figure out childcare. They don't have to figure out transportation. They get to eliminate a lot of the barriers that really reduce the engagement and the participation and the kind of recurring engagement of low and moderate income households on really good services that our community already has. And so there's an efficiency there. And so what we've done now is we've gone out to donors and we said, what's your favorite nonprofit that you give a grant to? And we said, okay, can you give them more money if we specialize it, that we're gonna house and focus on these specific properties? Because I can promise their rent's gonna be affordable for the next quarter century. They're gonna be housing secure. They're not gonna be moving an average of every 18 months, which is what most families in poverty do. They're not gonna be chasing an eviction notice. They're not gonna be chasing a rent increase. And so how much more impactful do you think that service that you're providing that family would be if you knew they were gonna be housing secure? They knew the child was gonna come up through the same schools and maintain their relationships with their teachers and their coaches and their guidance counselors. How much better with all the money we spend, philanthropy's always been 2% of GDP. How much better would that be if we also had that backstop to know that the people we're serving also had a stable home? And I think that's another premise and kind of an idea I think we should really explore if we were able to scale what we're doing on the housing front.
But also just really quickly, when we're talking about building homes, we're not just talking about the physical structure of the home. We're also talking about changing neighborhoods completely. So certainly I think when you're talking about land use, when you're building home, it is assumed, and maybe we shouldn't assume, that we're talking about adequate parks and recreation, adequate libraries, adequate museums and other spaces where folks can get the kind of educational outcomes that you like in the natural environment. So certainly we're talking about overall land use, but I'll be clear, and this is to reiterate something you said. You'd be surprised how much more resources you have for recreation when you can own a home, when homes are affordable. You just have more discretionary resources to do much more with.
So we're out of time, but I think what you heard is emblematic of the strength of the United States, right? Which is that there's an enormous amount of energy, there's an enormous amount of capital. New models are evolving from the ground up, cities, counties, states, public, private, civic. And if the federal government acts, God willing, the country's ready to move. If the federal government doesn't act, the country will act. So let's give a round of applause to our panel. Yeah.